All right, good evening. Today is May 5th, 2021. I'm calling the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order tonight. My name is Daniel Morrissey. I'm a chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Tonight, we also have with us member George Bruce, Walter Gould, Eddie Corbin, Norman Roldan.
Can you connect it to this?
And that's everybody we have, correct? For board members. And then we also have the code inspector, Michael Yakum is here. And we have our board secretary, Vanessa Adorno. So tonight is a continuation of last week's meeting. Because of during COVID, what we've been doing is the first Wednesday, which is the last Wednesday of the month, we have the hearings and presentations, testimony, written submission, so on and so forth. Normally at the end of that meeting, if it weren't for COVID, we would all be in the chambers in City Hall and we would do deliberations that same night. Instead, in order to comply in part with open meeting law in the Commonwealth, we have a second meeting, which is tonight, to allow this past week for anybody else that would like to write in, email, call in, anything like that, as a public speak out. And then tonight we hold deliberations. So we're first gonna go back to Norfolk Street is the first matter that we had on. And so we'll go straight into deliberations. Do we have the petitioner present?
Yeah.
Okay, and so we can also, as the board knows, if we have follow-up questions for the petitioner, we can do that. But typically we deliberate and we make a decision tonight. So would anybody like to start off? Anyone have anything to say on the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to start if my fellow colleagues have nothing to say for me.
Sure, Mr. Roldan.
All right, so I looked it over and I think it's a reasonable ask that he's asking for. I drove by there. I'm learning from my friend Walter a lot to drive through the area. So I drove by there and I see his point. They're pretty much almost the same. I don't know if you did, Walter, you drove by there, but they're almost the same lot sizes. It's very few that are different. And a fact that, I hope that this time around he takes advantage of the petition and go ahead and starts to build. It sounds like he does. So I'm okay with it. My thing is that since he's not the one building, that we make sure that they got to go zoning anyway for the parking. So whatever they do there that meets the requirement for the zoning for building. Other than that, I'm okay.
Mr. Chairman, Walter Gould.
Sure, go ahead.
Just one quick thing, Mr. King. In the future, if he was to come back to us for something else, it would be nice if we had a plan of what he wants to build. I mean, I know he came to us a few years ago and we supported it. It's just be nice if we had if he went out and petitioned his neighbors to make sure they were okay with it. And also if he had some kind of a plan to show us what was going to be built there. I mean, I'm assuming it's going to be a side-by-side. But in the future, if he does come to us again, if he could do that, that would be a great help because it makes us a lot easier for what we're looking at. And like Roland did.
Can't hear you, Mr. Gould. Can anyone having trouble hearing?
No, I can hear him.
I can hear him. I can hear him.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just saying that next time around, if he should come to us again, just to have some kind of a plan makes it a lot easier.
I agree.
Mike, do you normally if we were inclined to grant this variance, does the petitioner have to present to the planning department his plans that someone else has to approve those? Or we've put that in as a condition before, I think.
Correct.
Yeah, it's usually been part of the department's recommendations that if the board does grant it, that they would want to have a say in what's built there.
Okay. So if anyone is inclined to make a motion, it might make sense to have a condition that before they move forward, to break ground, that they have those plans presented to the planning department, that they're they're okay with the planning department also.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman. This is George Bruce. I make a motion that,
and I'll second it.
They have the plans that before they start building or developing, they should at least get the plans from the plan department before they go forward.
Okay, so Mr. Bruce's motion is to approve the variance with the condition that the petitioner presents the plan, the design, the plans to the planning department, that they approve them. And it was, motion was seconded by Eddie Corbin. So we'll take a roll call vote. Norman Roldan, how do you, if you could just vote aye or nay, or yes or no? Norman?
Yes.
Mr. Corbin?
Yes.
Mr. Bruce?
Yes.
Mr. Gould?
Yes.
Okay, and I also vote yes. So that is a unanimous vote in favor of the variance. Congratulations, your variance is granted. And you're dismissed. Just make sure that you allow, if you could just check with the board secretary to make sure that the decision and notice have been filed with City Hall before you break ground. That should take about 21 day period. Just make sure you check with the board secretary, Vanessa Adorno, that's everything's all set to move forward.
I'll do that.
And that's just because there's an appeal period once notice has been given to City Hall. And during that appeal period, you wouldn't be able to break ground until after that's done. And if there was an appeal, obviously, then you'd have to follow whatever steps in case there's an appeal. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. Again, congratulations.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. And then, so the next item we have on, the only other item we have on is Palmer Renewable Energy. I think it would be appropriate just if and this is more partly for me, I just left another meeting, and I don't know if anybody else needs this, that we just have a short recess, just a 10-minute recess, if that's okay. I just need to organize some of the paperwork that I looked at last week, if that's okay with everybody. And so in order to have that recess, we can just, I'm going to shut off, we can stay on the Zoom call. If you'd like to please just mute. I will shut off my video and mute. That would be the suggestion just during the recess, if you could. But that has to be done by motion, I believe. That's what I'm asking for, if possible.
I'll make a motion for 10-minute recess and come back in 10 minutes. So Dan, do you want to, I'll let you come back and shut the meeting once we're done. All right. So I'll make motion to 10-minute recess.
Is there
I
a second?
Oh, I second.
Seconded by George Bruce. Okay, so all those in, we'll do a roll call vote for the 10-minute recess. So Norman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Walter?
Yes. Do you hear me okay, Dan?
Yes, I do. There's just a little piece at the end of what you were saying before, but I can hear you loud and clear now. Eddie?
Yes. Yes.
And George? George, you there?
Yes.
Okay, do you vote? There's a motion on the floor for a 10-minute recess.
Yes.
Do you vote yes or no?
I vote yes.
Okay, and I also vote yes. That's unanimously in favor of a 10-minute recess. Thank you. I would ask that if you need to move around or whatever, that you just mute your mic and also shut off your video. You don't have to sign off of Zoom, but if you could just mute those at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. Be back in 10 minutes.
I'm going to pause the recording.
Right, exactly.
It's not like 10 minutes of silence.
Right, that's appropriate. Yep. Thank you.
All right, we're back on.
Okay, so this is Daniel Morrissey, the zoning board chair, calling the meeting back into order. So the only issue we have here is right now that one of our members, George Bruce, hasn't been able to sign back in. I believe it's because his cell phone battery possibly ran out. I just want to know from the attorney, from both sides, the attorneys on both sides, is there any? And I'm sorry, I was the one that I had asked for a short recess. I didn't know that we were going to lose one of the members. If that indeed is the case, that it's his cell phone battery, does either of you, if we wait 5 more minutes, is that a problem?
This is Peter Durning on behalf
Attorney
of Palmer Renewable Energy. Chair Morrissey, I have no objection to waiting a little bit longer.
Okay, Attorney Epka?
Objection to waiting another 5 minutes for George.
Okay, so why don't we just do this?
We have to go to vote. We have to vote.
Yeah, so if we're gonna do, why don't we just call it 10, then just call it, why don't we call it 10 minutes is the last time we do it, regardless of what happens when we come back on, we'll continue, okay? Is there a motion on the floor for a 10-minute recess?
I make a motion, Eddie Corbin. 10-minute recess.
Okay, so
I'll
Eddie
second it.
Corbin made a motion for a 10-minute recess,
I'll second it.
seconded by Norman Roldan. Please say, I'm gonna take a roll call vote. Please say aye or nay. Norman,
Yes. Yay.
Eddie,
Yes.
Walter?
Yes.
Okay, and I also vote in favor. So we're gonna take a 10-minute. Please don't sign off of Zoom, everybody. If you would like to mute or shut off your video, that's fine, but please stay signed in. Don't go anywhere. We might come back before the 10 minutes is up if possible, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. So
Hey,
we are now in
guys, wait a
recess.
minute. I
Oh.
think we might have action here. Mr. Bruce?
Hello? Yes, I finally got back on. I lost contact.
All
Hello?
right. Dan, you are not muted. I am
I'm
still
here,
on
I'm
the
here.
record. I am still on the record. And we have Mr. Bruce back.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we on the record?
We are.
Okay, so we're back on the record. There was no need for the additional 10-minute recess. So we are on for deliberations for Palmer Renewable Energy right now. Thank you to both. Believe we have two city councilors also who are present. Mr. Lederman, yeah, we have three. Mr. Fenton and Mr. Allen. Did I see Mr. Allen before?
Yes, he's here.
And then also thank you to Attorney Durning and Attorney Epka for being present in case we might also have questions for you while we're deliberating. If you could just make yourselves available, that would be great. Anyone would like to start off with their thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Walter Gould.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Gould.
I just got a request from you. If this is a little different than what we normally vote on, can we get a understanding of what a yes vote would mean tonight and a no vote would mean, either from Mike or you?
Yes, well, actually, Mike, go ahead.
City council filed the appeal. So a yes vote would mean to revoke the building permit.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Sure. And actually, I think a question that I'd like to ask just for more reiteration than elaboration would be from if either of the two sides would like to chime in. You both seem to, correct me if I'm wrong, seem to argue that as a matter of law for each of your respective versions of, of what should happen tonight. Could either of you just sort of in a nutshell, again, reiterate why, if I'm correct in summarizing that that both of you are asking, that the city council is asking that this be granted as a matter of law, and also that the PRE asking that this be denied as a matter of law. Either of you can chime in on that if there's anything additional.
Mr. Morrissey, this is Peter Durning from Mackey Shea Durning on behalf of Palmer Renewable Energy. I'll just chime in to say that, again, the manner in which this matter comes before you is because there was a petition from the city council to the building commissioner seeking enforcement. And in his February 23rd letter, the building commissioner determined that no such enforcement was necessary and that the permits were still effective. So the petition now from the city council to the ZBA is seeking to overturn the building commissioner's determination. With respect to your immediate question about whether or not the issue can be decided as a matter of law, that is very much our position. And I think in the timeline that we provided in our additional materials and in the short supplemental I provided is just walking through the appropriate time that should be assessed against the effective term of the building permit, and then the operation of the two statewide statutes that were adopted, the Permit Extension Act and the COVID Emergency Act. And I think what's important to note about the operation of both of those statutes is that although there was, excuse me, some comment last session that the Permit Extension Act was deliberately constructed for a narrow purpose, and that the application of the Permit Extension Act could conceivably be constricted just to projects that were seeking financing due to the recession, I would just observe that, again, as a matter of law, the Permit Extension Act itself does not contain any such limitation. The legislature did not say we will grant a 4-year extension and that all such extensions must be concluded and constructions completed by 2016, which would have been 4 years from 2012. The law as it stands is very broad, and it applies a 4-year tolling period for all permits in effect during any time in the catchment period of the Permit Extension Act, which these building permits certainly were. Similarly, the COVID Emergency Act, I know I had an exchange during the last session about the possibility of work and projects going forward, even during the time of the pandemic. And yet again, the law itself is very broad, and it allows for a tolling of any permit in effect during the emergency period, which we are still in. So again, as a matter of law, I think just the straight application of those two broad statutes to the timeline for the effective period of this permit, as a matter of law, the building permits are still effective. And thank you for the opportunity to address the board.
Thank you, Attorney Durning. Attorney Epka will also, allow you an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the board. To answer the question very simply, what we're asking for is this body to declare these permits that were issued to commence construction within 6 months in 2011 expired. The effect of that, the practical effect of that, which I understand to be the point of the question, is that in order to commence construction at this point, the applicant would need to apply for a special permit. That has been the case since 2013, 2014, that many years ago that they would need to apply for a special permit to begin construction on this. That's the point of the statute, that's the policy in place. So the particulars of the law and the timeline, I stand by what we filed initially. I'm happy to walk through the cases and timeline as elaborated in the supplemental filing to discuss the impact of those. But very simply, the effect or the impact of a yes vote would be that Palmer would now need to apply for a special permit to begin construction on this facility.
Anyone on the board have any other questions or any thoughts about, where they stand?
I have a question, and basically, because the timeline seems to start from November 15th, 2011, the date of the building permit. So I would imagine that was the date of the grant of the building permit. But it actually, there was 2 variances granted in November of 2008 for that project. And even though this is kind of strange, because even though the building permits were granted, you had 1 year to act on that variance to get those permits. So, I mean, I guess it looks like it's a 10-year span, but this actually started with the ZBA in 2008. What
were the petitions in 2008, Mike?
It was for the structure and the chimney. They had to get a variance for the height of the chimney. And those were granted in November 2008. And if you look at the timelines, they all start from November 15, 2011. I don't think anybody, each building permits were issued, but that does seem a little odd.
So in your what you're saying, in your opinion, though, how does that affect where we're at? What our decision would, how would that affect where we stand?
Well, I'm just saying that the project started really in 2008, not the project. The variance process started in 2008. You had 1 year to act on that. The building permits weren't granted until 2011. But maybe it's irrelevant for what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah, because these are right. Well, because we're doing the date of building permits, not the date of, you're talking about variances, correct? In
Yeah.
2008?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the date in 2011 is the date of, like it says in the chart we have, is the
So I
date of
guess-
building
And
permits.
that's why the project is 13 years versus the 10 that everybody's looking.
Yeah. How do people feel about the two versions of the timelines, about when, for instance, we have some additional supplemental from Attorney Durning, that the initial tolling of the timeline would have started at the filing of the appeal, which would have meant they would have burned less days towards the 180 of the total 180 days. So anyone have any thoughts about that? That came out this past week. Anyone on the board? I'm speaking to the board in deliberation right now.
Yeah. So my question to that, Mr. Chairman, is that it's like we need more clarification on that part, because how do we handle permits today? Do we handle it once we give the variance to start construction, or do we do it before that or after that? What is the clear path to this? What is today's rule?
So I'm gonna let Mike answer that, and then I'm gonna add something that I think has relevance. Mike, can you answer that question for Mr. Roldan?
Well, yes, they needed to get the variance before they can build the structures. And they did that in 2008. And then in 2011, they got their building permit. This isn't normal, because there was a Permanent Extension Act, there was lawsuits, appeals.
Right.
We are today. It's a complicated situation.
So, yeah, so basically, Norman, this wouldn't, the reason this is before us is because it comes to us because there's a question of whether or not the 180 days has been, if it's been consumed or not, if it's been used up or not. And so the timeline, the two versions of the timelines tell us two different things. And so what we need to decide tonight is what version of that timeline, based on they've used, each side has used plenty of case law to back up their side of, their timeline, which version we would adopt, and we would make a decision based on that.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Walter Gould.
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Gould.
Mike brought up something regarding the Board of Appeals in 2008. Now, I understand we're looking at the building permit here, but when we vote on something, isn't that like a 2-year window before you have to do something?
You have 1 year to act on.
Well, what I'm looking at is this. If there was a 2-year window, that would put it 2010. So the vote we took in 2008, would that mean they'd have to come back to this for the smokestack and the variance they asked for in 2008?
The building permits were granted.
They
were granted, yeah.
Yeah,
but they weren't granted to 2011, correct?
Right. Yes. I think you asked a good question, but I don't know that it's relevant. And I think that's also why it wasn't raised by either party, last week or this week. I think that we're strictly focused on the building permits, which have a 180-day timeline to be taken advantage of. Do you see what Mike raised that point about the 2008 variances. I don't see that as relevant. I mean, we could put it also to the parties. I mean, are either of the attorneys have any, knowledge of that 2008 variance and whether or not it's even relevant to tonight's decision?
No, thank you, Mr. Morrissey. This is Peter Durning. My understanding is that the building permits were obtained during the effective period of those variances, and that action was sufficient to effectuate the variances, and therefore they're not at an issue here. Just for everyone's education, there was also a special permit that was initially issued for this matter that was revoked, and that issue also went up on appeal. So there's some different timelines in the very early days of this matter that may impact the the progress of that timeline, but my understanding is that the building permits were obtained during the valid period of the variance, and that action was sufficient to effectuate the variances as well. And now, due to tolling because of appeals and by the operation of statute, those building permits are still effective, and therefore those variances are still effective.
Attorney Yepka, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just that the focus here, we agree the focus is on the building permits and the delay in commencing construction there. But I think Mike's point is relevant, and that the project really started in 2008, and that the policy there, the issue of commencing construction within a reasonable time in order to make sure that the neighborhood or the law did not change. Here, the subsequent ordinance is the relevant piece. The law was just very different when the variance was granted, and therefore the permit that was issued based on those variances is not necessarily one that would be issued today. It would not be, and would not be appropriate for the neighborhood or for Springfield. So that's really the core here, is that this is those decisions that this body made 13 years ago, allowing activity now. There's a huge gap there between the decision to allow activity and then the taking advantage of that. The intervening permit is where we focus, because as a matter of law, the issuance of the permit is what was necessary to take advantage of that variance. But in order to take advantage of the permit, they needed to start construction. So that's why we're focused on that issue here. And
so thank you, Attorney Yepka. So for the board, I mean, really, just our focus just needs to, in my opinion, needs to be from in the timeline from 2011 all the way till, let's see where it ends in, in 2021, basically. All of those different items. Okay, there's appeals. We have the COVID Emergency Act. You have other things that are cited in this timeline by both sides that are intervening occurrences that might have stopped that timeline or not. And we need to decide whether or not the decision that was made to give those building permits back in 2011, given all of these interruptions, is still valid or not. So the point on one side is that there wasn't the work that was done wasn't enough to be called construction. It was pre-construction. So is it pre-construction or is it construction? Is it continuous or was it not continuous? And whether or not there, that the pre-acted in good faith throughout this. I mean, there was an appeal filed. They're trying to take advantage of these permits now, so many years later. Is it their fault that there were this many interruptions, or are they within the 180 days still? I think that's really more or less the gist of it. Not so eloquently put as the attorneys may have put it, but does anyone have any question about what I just said about what we're deciding? Yeah, Norman.
Mr. Chair, I do understand. I went back and looked at some of the documentation.
Sure.
My vote, this is my personal vote. I think there was more than enough time to do the work, more enough time to get things done. In the city, we have, even with the COVID restrictions, we were still having construction done. A lot of companies are doing their stuff. To me, this is my opinion, I think that this is too much time. I think now they have to reappeal for everything they need to go for, and if they need to do it again, they have to do it again. But I think this is too much time. I don't agree with it giving more time or expanding it. But
okay,
Mr. Chairman, Walter Gould.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Gould.
I agree with Norman. I think we've been going through this long enough that there was plenty of time. Yes, there were different things going on that stopped this, has held that up, but I agree with Norman. I think we've had plenty of time on this project, and if they have to do what they got to do, that's fine. But I agree with Norman. I think there's been plenty of time to get something done.
Yeah, I mean, on my side, I just see there's so many I mean, I understand both sides, and I understand the the public concern also, obviously, but I mean, in terms of the the issue of construction versus pre-construction, I mean, there was a lot of risk that was put into this by PRE, and I know that the city council is arguing that was pre-construction. They didn't actually break ground. I mean, the question for me is whether or not it was done in good faith, as as if it was construction. I mean, there was a lot of work done, and I'm looking at the timeline. I mean, it's a busy timeline where they were interrupted so many times by intervening causes. I just don't. So I have difficulty. I respect what Mr. Roldan and Mr. Gould say. I just don't know if I agree. If I agree with them. How about Mr. Corbin or Mr. Bruce? How do you gentlemen feel?
I'm still siphoning through all this stuff because there's so many dates and so many cross references, and that one says it started at this date, the other one says it started at another date, and the question becomes, why did it take so long to get this thing up and running off the ground? I mean, it's been a number of years. I don't understand that.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Bruce.
One of the questions I think that the delay and nobody was kind of dodging the issue. The community at large is saying they don't want it in that area. And regardless of how they feel, we seem to have to understand that this is their neighborhood. And you got a lot of issues concerning their concerns. That is not worthy of going forward in my estimation. The other thing is this: in all the research across this country, these bio plants are not put into beautiful neighborhoods.
Right.
They're not put into places where the residue, whatever, goes off into their property. So you take a minority neighborhood, a minority that's low in contents, then you have a lot of health issues that's concerned. These are reports across the country. So they're doing the same thing here in the city of Springfield. The question big is why we kept saying over the years, no, rejection, this and that. There's got to be a reason. It's not about the development. It's not about all that. It's about people saying we don't want it in our neighborhood. And so let's face facts. And so whether they got to do it, they got to do it. But the point is, we are talking about a neighborhood in the city of Springfield that says no. And we as a board has to realize that we're human too. They're our neighbors. And great constraint is understanding. So my concern is, over the years, this is the reason why this has not been complete. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Bruce. I really do. And I remember, rewinding however many years at public hearing and everything. I guess I'm just concerned that, that we're really sure of what the specific question is before us. So,
okay.
So you're right. Normally, if this was a variance request, one of the issues would be if this was a detriment to the public. But on this specific question, there was a timeline, whether or not that timeline, whether it's lapsed or whether it hasn't, given the two versions of timelines that we see from each party tonight. So as much concern as we might have.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Mr. Roldan, go ahead.
So it's just that, thank you. So I'm just, my what I see out of this is that you're right. There's stop and goes, and permits were pulled and permissions were, but yet at one point there was nothing done towards it at all. Towards the end, yeah, there was more done. And if they knew ahead of time this was going to be an issue, and they had all the permits and had the T's crossed and line and dotted I's were done, it would never been an issue for them to start building and doing what they need to do. My problem is they took too long to do anything, because even when they had the green light that we just mentioned, like Mike mentioned, they had to go ahead.
Right.
It's like they didn't have to go ahead. They had to go ahead. So to me, is they took too long. It's just a spread of time, and we're going to continue this on. And I don't want to make this. I'd have it for any other company that comes into the city and do the same thing. I'm generalizing to everybody. I'm not specifying one group or the other group, but this is too long. It's never been in our history in zoning that we had this open permit this long. This is where I have my difficulty, right? And it's like they couldn't do anything. They were able to do stuff that they stopped. That would be their decision. So to me, it's too long for building.
So a question then. So that's a great point. So Mr. Roldan, though, if we look at the timeline, though, I'm on the the timeline that was submitted by PRE. This is PRE, correct? Mr. Attorney Durning, right?
Yes, that was an appendix to our filing, correct?
Right. Oh, my battery's about to run out. So do you have that timeline, right, Mr. Roldan?
I have it. Yeah, I was.
So if we look at that, just go down it. Really, I'm just going to plug in here for a moment. So you can hear my voice. You can't see me, but okay. So start at the top. You have City Council appeals on December 11th, 2011. You have go down a little bit further. You have September 12th, 2014, City Council files appeal. You have September 28th, 2015, City Council files appeal. Then you have, that right, that's 3 appeals by the Springfield City Council, which no doubt is I understand their concern is for the public. I get it. I'm also concerned. But those are intervening items that weren't brought about by the PRE itself. That was brought about by another party. So how can we hold the PRE to break ground when there's multiple appeals that were filed against them on this timeline that held them up?
Did they meet? But my question: did they meet the appeal? Was an appeal addressed, and they were able to go on?
Well, if you look at the timeline, you've got.
Does the appeal mean they stopped construction completely, or they addressed the appeal? You know what I mean? That's the question I would ask for the law department.
Say that one more time, please.
Does the appeal mean they have to stop construction completely and start all over when the appeal has been cleared, or does it mean that you continue on working even when the appeals there's an appeal?
So what it means is that they're not.
I mean, there's an appeal a specific part
during that period of time. They're not using up the 180 days that they have to use the permit.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? They
Yeah,
weren't doing anything wrong.
I mean, even between that, even
yeah, it would have been nice if none of this stuff happened. All this stuff over the last 10 years or whatever, but it did. And so I know that 10 years sounds like a really long time. Over one shoulder, I totally understand that, this voice over one shoulder is talking about, the public good and what it means to have this type of operation running in a city. We heard those arguments, but I just don't see those as relevant, I mean, it looks like Walter, I know we have Walter and Mr. Roldan sounds like they are decided, and Mr. Corbin and Mr. Bruce, are you ready to move to a vote? Do you know how are you decided?
Yeah.
You are decided?
Sorry.
Mr. Bruce and Mr. Corbin, do you have you don't have to say what your decision is, but are you decided, or do you see, that there's a need for further deliberation tonight?
I'm decided.
Okay. So I just want to clarify again, Mike, can you just clarify again? And I agree, you said it perfectly before. A yes vote means, go ahead, Mike.
to revoke the building permit. Because
The
city
yes vote would
council
revoke
appeal.
the building permit. Meaning that they, go ahead.
And a nay vote would mean to keep them in place.
And if it is a yes vote and the building permit is revoked, then they would have to go for a special permit in order to continue the project?
I believe I believe they can actually they can appeal the board's decision. Or, they can, if you're under the new book, you probably would need a special permit. But
Right.
at this point, you can actually appeal the board's decision if that was the case.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
can you hear me, Walter Gould?
Yeah, Mr. Gould, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure I was off mute. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, we can hear you. All right.
Dan,
Yes.
Dan, can you just repeat that again? Just make sure we're real clear on this.
So a yes vote would, which is what the city council is asking, would revoke the building permits. A no vote would keep the building permits intact, would allow them to move forward with these building permits.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just offer a clarification.
Yeah, sure.
I think a yes vote would declare the permits expired, not revoke them. This board's activity,
Yes,
you're not
okay.
deciding that
Correct,
they
okay.
are, yeah,
That's what I thought,
that by
yeah.
operation of the timeline, they have long since lapsed, rather than this board affirmatively acting and deciding to revoke them.
Okay, and Attorney Durning, do you have anything different to say? Does that, you agree that that's the,
Yeah,
that would
I
be the
think,
outcome?
I thank you for the opportunity. I agree with Attorney Epka. I think he makes an important distinction. The question before the board is not whether to
Right.
simply revoke the permits because folks might think
Right.
that too much time has passed. The question
Right.
is, can the board determine that the permits have in fact lapsed and therefore have expired as a matter of law? That's really the question before the board.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so
Mr. Chairman, Walter Gould,
Yes,
one thing
Mr. Gould.
before we vote.
Yeah.
I just want to commend both lawyers for their job. I mean, they've worked diligently, made this a tough decision, and I want to commend both of them for what they did in their work. So, okay.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Gould. Okay, so do we have is there a motion on the floor?
Yes, I'll make motion to expire the licenses as a yes vote.
So the motion would be, your motion is then to grant the petition of the city council, which in effect would declare the building permits expired.
Correct.
Okay,
Walter
so
Gould, I second that.
okay, so we have a motion from Mr. Roldan to grant the petition of the city council, finding that the building permits are expired, seconded by Mr. Gould.
Correct.
Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Roldan,
Yes.
Mr. Gould,
Yes.
Mr. Corbin,
Yes.
and Mr. Bruce.
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Yes.
gonna vote. I'm gonna vote no, and I know that we have a 4-1 vote in favor of the petition by the city council. Thus, the city council's petition is granted, and the building permits are deemed expired. Please make sure that you reach out to reach out to the city law department and Vanessa Adorno for any appeal periods. All right. We have no other matters on the floor tonight. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I make that motion, Mr. Chairman. I make that motion we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Bruce to adjourn,
Second.
Second, Walter Gould.
seconded by Mr. Corbin. Although, we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Roldan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Gould,
Yes.
Mr. Corbin,
Yes.
and Mr. Bruce.
Yes.
Okay, I also vote in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And everybody have a great night, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye,
To
guys.
the board.
Bye-bye.
Members.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all those attending. Thank you very much.
Night.